So we did teaching, learning, strong curricula, and meaningful assessment. I don't think, anyone can do those things justice, but I do think that they should be part of the discussion rather than the political discussion we're having. This is what we should be talking about. It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free. It's another episode of Freedom Friday, and you're still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after this hour with Sharif El-Mekki and me. Sharif, how are you doing, brother?
Great to see you. Happy Friday, bro. Happy Freedom Friday.
Surprised you're not flying around somewhere, in the world.
And I'm so grateful to be home. It's been a wild spring, man. It's been a wild spring, but
I mean, you've been to Montana, Colorado. Didn't you go out of the country at some point?
No, not recently.
No, not this year.
That would be too, yeah. I mean, that was a while back, yeah. But yeah, it's been a lot.
I don't think people know how hard you work. So, and like education, period. This is what we always talk about. I don't think the public understands the mystery behind the curtain, like how much, even advocacy, how much there's involved in advocacy, or with you. When I tell people, oh, my brother Sharif is creating a Black teacher pipeline, that sounds good. But I don't think they know what the work is to make that happen.
Bro, just so right now we're in the midst of like 5 things, that occur. So obviously summer, we have our Freedom School Literacy Academy. So we got to hire about 100 people for virtual as well as in person here in Philly, where high school students and college students are teaching first, second, and third graders.
Wow.
Right. Those high school and college kids have coaches, and site staff to really mentor them. Here's what Black pedagogical framework looks like. Here's how you write a lesson plan. Here's how you lead a classroom. Here's how you develop relationships and build trust quickly, right? Because we only have 4 or 5 weeks, right? So all of those kind of things. And then we're also, we don't want this recruitment of Black teachers to be ignorant of the social, economic, and political realities of Black youth, right? So if you're a district and you're just saying, oh, we want more diversity, but you're not thinking about what's the cost of college for them? What's the cost of becoming a teacher? You're just saying like, oh, you're using all the rhetoric, but you're not really looking at the results. Then that's a chasm between hope and reality, right? So we're part of that is the economic barriers of becoming a teacher. Even if I want to, if I'm first gen, that means my family's going to get bills that I've never seen before, as a family. So how do we interact with that? Right. Like, so there are all these things. And you're a Black male, Chris, you talked about becoming a teacher. So if you went now to a traditional, like, hey, I want to go prepare to become a teacher, you might be the only Black man in your class for the entire time you're trying to learn how to become a teacher. Right. And
yeah.
What does that do for an 18-year-old Black boy who's accustomed to, more diversity being amongst his people, and then getting to the university like, well, this looks nothing like anything that I'm experienced, right? So all of that is, just things that we try to interrupt and intervene with our programming. So that's just a snapshot of like what the team has been working on, but I'm really proud of the team and they're working hard and the community has been responding. But
so, let's stay here for a second. Okay, let's just say somebody's listening to this show. They're somewhere else and they're a Black male and they want to teach, or they at least want to be involved. They want to get in your pipeline. Tell me 2 things. What's the easiest way for them to be able to afford doing it and to get there? Like, let's just use me. I want to be in a kindergarten. That's the grade I want to teach. There's job openings for that nearby. I'm in my career, I'm doing other things right now, but I want to go teach kindergarten. What's the best pathway for me there? Well, let's just start with that question. I have 2 questions, but let's start with that one.
Yeah. And unfortunately, like many states are pretty complicated how to get certified. So the first thing I would, advise you to look at is like, okay, what in Minnesota allows you to get certified, and really look at them and what's the cost of those. Some would say, there's some universities like, hey, come back and get another degree, Chris. And then you can, and pay us all this money to do it. There also may be residencies or other ways to get it, some alternative certification processes. Good ones, right? Not the crazy ones. You're like, wait a minute, who actually graduates from here? Don't get the Renner Center version of teacher cert programming, right? And so
University of Akron online, right?
yeah, yeah, it's just something wild, and it's so many out there that it's just like what those payday lenders or whatever, just out there
Hmm.
to steal from you. So making sure it's just a quality place that can also is affordable. That would be the number one thing, and a lot of places have it. Like you have Teach Indy in Indianapolis. Y'all probably have something similar. It could be an alt cert. Maybe
We
TFA's
do.
age has raged, or City Teaching Alliance, or Relay,
Yeah.
and there are some universities who are trying to drive down costs. So I would even look at National Center for Grow Your Own and see, okay, where they partner with like 40 states and see,
Hmm.
okay, National Center Grow Your Own, what do they have? Who do they partner with? And their whole goal is to drive down the cost where you can become a teacher without going into debt.
Might need to see them for one.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I was going to say that the University of Minnesota did do some special arts alt cert thing. I think they worked with the New Teacher Project or
Okay. Okay.
some national group that helped them design the program, and it's under attack every year.
Mm.
Like
That's
every every legislative session there are people trying to whittle away. One of the things that they were doing to do that was that we have 4 tiers of licensure in Minnesota. The
mm,
first 2 tiers allow people like community experts to come and teach for a period of time. Like you can teach for this year, but next year you got to be entering a program or something like that. And the way that the establishment was working to get the alt cert program gone was that they wanted to outlaw the 2 bottom tiers, the entry tiers, the tiers that would
hmm
let someone like me get into the
Join. Yeah.
classroom. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in Minneapolis, I'll say, for instance, we have like if you lose your music teacher but you have musicians, Minnesota's a musician heavy place. If you have an elder in the community who teaches drum or teaches one of those, they can get that kind of one certification to
That
be able to come in and teach
certification.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the community
um,
certified, which is, yeah. Yeah.
but they want to eliminate that, and they want to eliminate the alt cert program. So I better get into the kindergarten before
And look,
before
and
this all
find a
gets destroyed.
residency. That's what we've
Yeah.
been really encouraging folks, like residencies, and this way you are learning underneath with the guidance. It's like an apprenticeship for, adults type of thing.
I think I
I think they're
found
so
one,
powerful.
Sharif. I think
Yeah.
I found a well, I think I found a couple of schools that would help me do that if I wanted to. I mean, people need
What do
teachers
you mean
right
if
now.
you
It's
want
just
to?
it's
You
just
do
a
want to. You know
I
what I
do,
mean?
but listen, this is what a lot
Life
of,
is life. And yeah.
this is what a lot of black males probably have going on. I have multiple kids in school heading towards college. We got done with braces last year, but it seemed like every time I turn around, there's a new something.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to go teach kindergarten. Cool. How much does that pay?
Mm,
you know,
mm,
so anyways, the last
no.
thing, the second question I was going to ask you about this, and then we can move on to today's topic, was what if I don't want to do it forever? Like it
hmm
used to be with the TFA thing, and I don't want to open a can of worms because I know how people feel about TFA. Just for the record, I'm the only person in TFA that was a member of the Corps who never served. So I
You're a
got
TFA core member, but you never served.
yeah, I got kind of like an honorary doctorate from TFA. Um, uh, my point in saying that was it used to be okay if you were going to get bright people to come in for a couple of years, maybe 2 to 5 years to teach. And are we over that? Is that kind of like a outdated um, possibility? I mean, did we move on from that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I know their numbers had been down for a while, but those numbers are back up. They're extremely diverse. They're recruiting folks from those communities. And I think sometimes people have this nostalgic view of teaching of like, oh yeah, my teacher was there for 35, 40 years. And which is heroic. I mean, I love meeting educators who are, just lifelong. But I think, it's not just teaching. This generation, the past couple of generations are less likely to do that. I forget, like, reading like millennials, how often they, change professions and things like that. So they don't look at the career as a, one lane journey. They look at their life and career span as multiple opportunities, and they're really going towards like mission. I think I would look at it as like TFA. There's a significant number who actually stay beyond that 2 year episodes, significant number of them. So, I think all of that should be factored in. And the third point that I always bring up is like, what people disparage this short commitment of you know, Teach for America. When you look at traditional schools who've invested 4 years, 5 years, or whatever into the university of learning how to teach, the the difference isn't that stark about how long
Hmm.
they stay.
Hmm.
So it's just like, wait a minute, this group was recruited, their junior or senior year to teach for 2 years. You were recruited basically out of high school. You were in a ed prep program, from freshman year to senior year, and you also didn't stay longer than 2 years. So I think, it's also, I think we have to be careful not to try to mask, like working conditions, learning conditions, and just say, oh, well, that group from that teacher from that group didn't stay. Well, yours didn't stay either, so stop pointing to everyone else and fix the issues at hand. So, yeah, listen, I've told this story a million times, but when I first became a principal, turnaround school was not only being set on fire physically, constantly were so bad that they had moved trash cans out of bathrooms and hallways, which of course that means trash is on the floor.
Right.
No art or student work hanging up because they're like, oh, kids will burn it down. That was the kind of environment. They looked at a study. Students had less than 1% growth on their state test scores over 5 years, right? Like, so the average was less than 1% growth. And I think we inherited about 3 to 5% proficiency rates in the school. And then the district also told me, like, hey, you're going to have 7 vacancies this year. So me as a new principal, like why would I, accept that, want that? That's not desirous as you're trying to turn around a culture to have 7 vacancies. Like that is massive and often unspoken about, like the impact of that. Teacher vacancy on coaches, on instruction and culture. And they said, well, we're partnering with Teach for America, who I had never heard of. And I said, oh, 2 year commitment versus 7 vacancies all year? Like, sign me up. And they were part of the partnership collaboration community that helped turn Shaw Middle School around. And many of them are still in education. This was back in 2003.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good thing to be able to say. First of all, that they persisted, that they didn't, come in and get driven out. Um, and they had enough time. This is the thing I do. I said, what about the people that just want to teach for 2 to 5 years? But there is also this notion of like you just get started. You're just getting started of being good, like teachers that have a 30-year career. When is it that they hit their peak of like they're confident, they know what they're doing, they've done it enough, right? Which you said is true. Within the first 5 years, I, I forgot what the statistic is, but it's astounding. It's like half are gone. And what I saw from some government stats, the ones that leave first are the ones with the highest SAT scores. Now, I'm not saying that testing means everything, and I'm not saying we should, take too much away from that. But there is if every year within the first 5 years, your teachers that have high SAT scores are leaving the profession, there's something to that. You should pay attention to that in some way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, half of the population. And just imagine, depending on the district, that might be $25,000 cost per vacancy. So every time someone leaves,
Wow.
yeah, that's maybe $25,000 to rehire, retrain, reposition them. That's a ton of money when you see some of the attrition rates, and Lord knows, like the attrition rates for students of color, I mean, for teachers of color is even higher, and they tend to be in schools with students of color where the need is greater. So like all of these equity issues start coming into play, and they generally like you. I say most folks, you feel good about teaching, you understand it around your third year.
You're not going to agree with me, but I'm going to say it
Mm.
anyways. See,
Good.
you say that like the majority, a good number of the people of color, the teachers of color, is the ones that leave. And what you're not going to agree with is that's because your kids are bad. See, so I'm going to call that the
It's
oh hell no. That's the oh hell no group. They come in, they teach for a year, and they're like, oh hell no. No, 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 no.
well, here's the challenge. Here's the challenge. So just picture them as firefighters. They see a issue, the biggest issue, the issue that resonates with them, the issue that may mirror their own experience. Where is that? That's going to be in schools with students who look like them. But it's not necessarily bad kids. It's really bad policies, bad procedures, bad systems, right? Because imagine a firefighter, like, oh, there's the fire. I'm running in there. But when you get there, they're like, oh, yeah, well, we're not really turning the water on fully for you. So you're going to put it out with this trickle, right? And so, like, it's
Yeah,
more of that. Like, wait a minute, why can't I turn the hose on fully to douse the flames? And it's like all of these policies. You're usually, often, not always, but often, you're in schools that are underfunded, under resourced. You have a leadership issue where we're talking about teachers not being developed. I mean, the amount of school leaders, principals who are underdeveloped is staggering. And they
yeah.
have a monumental impact on the school, as a whole, right? So you're seeing all of these things, just chaos, right? Just systematic chaos. So small things that seem small that are huge, right? Imagine you're teaching. Imagine a show, and every 20, 30 minutes or every hour, announcement comes on, so and so please report to the office, right? Imagine that, like, how, like, the first time, the second time, imagine you experience that 50 times in a school year.
You know
like
what?
eh, like
It like
it's
this is
like
not going to be.
so
It's
many
not.
dumb things that happen.
This is not going to be a great analogy, but sometimes when I'm flying, I get my earphones, my earbuds in. I'm calm. I start, listening to my music or whatever, and I swear it feels like every 5 minutes they have something to announce. And if you get the credit card today, we'll be happy to like give
How
you a
annoying is
thousand
that?
miles. It's
Yeah, yeah,
very
yeah.
annoying.
I hate it,
It's
right?
very
So
annoying.
imagine you're actually working, you've developed, and you're teaching, you have the kids' attention, and then they're looking for so and so, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, so and so, please report to the, like, all these just silly things that indicate instruction is not the most important thing that's happening in this building.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of somebody getting off their ass and going to find whoever they need to find, they're making an announcement for hundreds of people for one person, right? Like, it's not urgent, it's not emergency, it's not like those kind of things add up, man. It really impacts culture, and that's just one tiny thing, but it's part of a myriad of issues that sometimes people are not thinking about, like how culture and systems work within schools. But that's a great analogy, actually. Just the annoyance of that. Now imagine if you're actually teaching and talking and engaging. So we're so and so. Then what happens? The kid was like, "Yeah, I saw so," right? Like, then you may have lost the class because everybody's now talking about whatever the announcement was.
This is why you tune out. Well, that's a good segue into our conversation for today because, I did a show not too long ago with Tim Pool. We talked about it. I was on this very conservative podcast,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Good for
and my,
you.
I was
God
getting double
bless you.
teamed. I got double
Of
teamed or
course.
triple teamed, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. By
they
the
wanted
host
to.
and the other guests, right? Like,
That's
that
right.
was like a straight
That's
up,
right.
like, get
If
them.
you remember the Harlem Globetrotters, they used to play a team. I was that team that the Globetrotters play and make all the dunks. And I forgot what they were called, but that was me on the show. But my only point in saying there, I try to have one point. Like when I'm walking into a situation like that, I just try to remember I don't have to say everything. You guys can beat me up on everything else, but I'm going to stick to what matters. What's the signal through the noise? And they wanted to talk about school choice because all the schools suck. All the schools are terrible. All the public schools are just absolutely horrible. And we got to we just shut it down, get all the kids out of it and whatever. That's not something I'm unfamiliar with as a shtick. I mean, it's something I had definitely a long time ago. But if I were to ask myself today, what's the most honest conversation, the most productive and useful conversation we could be having today? It is not about things that have no research behind them to do anything good for student achievement. School choice does not have good research on the outcomes for kids. I love the idea of getting our kids into new opportunities. I love the idea of us having more power over it. I'm just trying to make the point of that's not actually an educational intervention. That's a political or a system intervention, but it's not one that's aimed at student achievement getting better. So, So we have that discussion, and we overlook different aspects of education all the time. The need for strong, well-prepared teachers, rigorous curricula, meaningful assessments, data-driven decisions, and funding that like is targeted to where people need it to be. Right, like not just funding in general, but funding things that work. And all of this, the core of educational success, I think, is in that package of things I just said. It's the science of teaching and learning, and I'm loath to say the science of teaching because people are gonna think, oh, it's a trendy thing. You're just making up a new package. No, no, no. All the things that I mentioned have always been what makes education turn. Let's say it again. Strong, well-prepared teachers, rigorous curricula, meaningful assessments, data-driven decisions, and targeted educational interventions. Those are the things that when you put them together, like a recipe, you're going to get further than many of the political conversations that we're having, many of the things that we're talking about so often. So, what do you think, Sharif? Is that a good enough strong point to stick with for me?
Yeah,
Me
no,
specifically. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I feel like being fiddler half the time, saying grits, dummy, it's the grits, dummy. You know what I mean? Just like, like, yo, stay. Like, this
yeah.
is what this is,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I think sometimes people want to, distract. One, they don't know what they're talking about as far as like what actually helps kids learn. What's the research? What's the brain science? What are all of those kind of things? Right? There is a science to teaching, and there is a science to preparing us people to teach. There's a science to learning environments that are conducive to teaching, right? Like there's all of those kind of things. And what I would say about the options for a variety of learning environments is that there are some schools that are, try to be more nimble than others, and families being able to find like what's the right fit, what's the right focus and culture of that school. And so, like I think they don't have to, contradict each other. They can actually support each other. But I think so much of the conversation, you know, diverts away from the grits. What's the
The
principles of
grits.
this? Of the grits? What's the
Yeah.
principle of this issue? What's
Yeah.
teaching and learning? How's it happening? Um, you know, we see, folks got beautiful buildings and no instruction.
Hmm.
So that means it has to be deeper than that. It has to be deeper than a lottery. It has to be deeper than all these other things. It's like foundational gravitational pull towards that. So I have a bias towards teaching and learning in any conversation, and I think you're spot on with that.
Let's do kind of like just a quiz on what you think about some of these things in the different pieces. So when it comes to strong prepared teachers, and I would also add to that supported teachers. Like it's one thing to prepare them and to put them in a place, but that's not the end of the story. Like with teachers, that's the beginning of the story in some cases. How do you help them over time? Number one, become better. Number two, stay supported and don't burn out, all that stuff. So, so what's the problem and what's the fix in your mind when it comes to teachers, having strong teachers? What's the problem and what's the fix?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two parts to it, and I'm glad you mentioned the support piece. So, one, I think the entry point, being having quality development prior to being in front of children. I think that, if there was one thing that I would say, like, we need to kind of blow up in a lot of places and start over, is the educator prep programming.
Hmm.
you know, uh, Teachers, principals, support staff, even school board members. Like, what is the training? What's the intellectual genealogy? What's the cultural legacy? What are the things that you're understanding about children? What's your mindset about children? So we believe like mindset, skill, and will. That's the foundation for a teacher.
Hmm.
What's their
Hmm.
mindset about the communities that send them to? Are they blame the kid kind of thing? Are they, going to keep trying to figure out like how to address a issue, how to intervene, that kind of thing? Like, what's their stick with itness, their determination and their belief, their love, their positive feelings about children and the communities that love them. That's one that is foundational.
Say those three
Another
things again, though. So it's
mhm,
mindset,
mindset
skill, and will.
and will, right? And
Okay.
so then the
Okay.
skill. Who developed them? Like, what's their intellectual genealogy? Who trained them? And what did they believe about the children that they're going to serve? Have they even been there? Right? We got people who are training teachers who actually have never taught, right? Like they've studied the idea of teaching but haven't taught, right? And so that to me that's a difference, right? I've met professors who are like, oh yeah, well I didn't teach, well I did my student teaching to get my degree, and then I just kept going to school. Now I'm preparing hundreds of people to go teach students I've never interacted with. I don't live with them. I've
Mhm.
never lived with them. I don't interact with them. I don't engage with them. I'm nothing, right? So that's that's just a part of it. But you even have urban studies that's still not really talking about when they say urban studies, you know what they mean, but it's not aligned with what good practices are. So anyway, those skill sets, like if you're teaching science or you're teaching reading, right? Like what does it mean to be effective? What does the brain science say? What happens? All of that training and development. But it can't just stop once the person is hired, right? Like this training should continue. There's a sad research out there that says, teachers, and again, this is research and average and generalization, blah, 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 but they stop developing after, around their 10th year.
That's a long time, though. I mean, in their 10th year, they plateau. Is that what you're
They
saying?
plateau, yeah.
Okay, yeah,
But if they plateau at a great place, okay, that's fantastic. Suppose they
yeah.
plateau at a pretty a not so great place, right? But the thing about it is the development, the continued development and support and mentorship, and the kind of the worst thing that can happen to you if you're a good teacher starting off is that you're a good teacher starting off, because it means like, oh, you're okay. We're not going to support you in any kind of way. We're going to go help only those classrooms where the chairs are being thrown or the class is on fire or nothing's happening. If you're like doing okay and your room's not on fire, as the phrase goes, we're ignoring you. We're not supporting you in any way. So how does that teacher
because
really?
because it's assumed that you've got it.
They're like, oh, you got
Yeah,
it. You're
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Yep. We don't have to worry about you. But there's students in there who need that teacher to even be better, right? Like going from good to great in all kind of instances and improving and development. So to me it's like pre-service and in service and then continuation. How do we continue to coach, support, mentor teachers, like leaders, like just like in a business community they would say, oh yeah, leaders, they should continue to be developed, continue to grow, continue to do those things. But so often they may be left on their own.
So a question about that. Um, First of all, do we have the resources to do all that? I mean, it feels like you got a lot of teachers. There's 3 million teachers. Someone told me yesterday that the teaching force in the United States is the largest workforce. I didn't know
Hmm.
this, right? So you're talking about the largest workforce of each one of those 3 million people needing somebody who's supporting them, and you
But
know,
remember the age old black teaching tradition is you lift as you climb. So it
hmm
doesn't
hmm
necessarily mean that you have a one on one, for out. But if you're a veteran educator, how do you support a newer teacher, and then maybe your principal or other person is supporting you, right? And so it can be tiered in a way where it's supportive of each other, and this is how it all stands up, right? And so it's really that goes back to like school design and funding and how people think about teaching and rosters and schedules, right? Because that's where the complications come in. But first you got to say, like, you know what, coaching is important to us. This is an important part of our DNA as a school system. And then you start designing to address that, to fix that. It's leadership opportunities, which is why some teachers leave, because they're like, I don't want to be a principal. I want to be a teacher, but I want to be able to have leadership. I want to be able to share what I've learned. And they're like, no, be quiet. Don't, you can't, we can't afford you to do that. And that's anywhere. Like eventually they leave, right? That's any profession. If you feel like
hmm
you can't
hmm
contribute in a meaningful way beyond, the box that people may want to keep you in. And there's some who like, I don't want to do anything else, but there are others who want to, right? There are others who want to and would support the teacher down the hall because they want them to be successful. They may share the same kids. They're like, yo, I need you to be successful because when they leave your room and coming into my room, it
yes.
takes a while to get them, back on point. So like this, it's a community of learning and support and coaching that can be developed.
So I feel very smart because I feel like I added something into the mix. So if we're just going to wrap up this part of the thing,
Hmm.
the discussion for teachers, to have strong teachers, we need to focus on mindset. skill, will, and support. Um, I added the support part, so I feel like you
That's important.
should trademark that part.
Absolutely critical.
And it also sounds like part of support is not just saying the word, but there's some specifics around what support means. Uh, when you were talking, I was going to say to you though, like you become a veteran teacher, you have new teachers come in. There's a mild expectation that you're going to be kind of a mentor to them in some ways. Now that's an additional part of your work or your job. You're not paid for that, but it's a psychic load that you have to carry and keep teaching yourself, right? And still be a good teacher yourself. Um, do we do enough to think about teacher pathways? Because it seems like you said people plateau at 10 years. Well, 10 years is right about the time where you're saying in any occupation, is this all there is? My aunt taught for 33
The
years,
average
so,
marriage is what, 5 years. So like, 10 years is double that. What I mean? So
I mean, I don't know how you solve for that though, because you have when we talk about veteran teachers, we're often talking about teachers that have taught for 20, 25, 30, 35 years, long enough to get the pension, which is that's 3 decades or so of teaching. So they didn't hit that point where they were like, is this all there is? But imagine, going into teaching at 24, being really let loose about 26, 27-ish, and then now for the next until you're 50 or until you're 52 or 53, that's what you're going to do. You're going to come in that same classroom every year with a different set of kids that all look alike. They're all sneezing on you and all that type of stuff, whatever.
that's that kindergarten class you're longing for. Like,
uh, so you're 7, same thing. You're 8, same thing. You're 9, same thing. And it's kind of like, I don't know how you get out of that, because you do need people to stay in the classroom and keep teaching. You can't make everybody a principal. You can't make everybody uh, something, but can we invent some new things for them to be, or, you know,
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the one part of it I want to kind of lift up out of that. Like, I appreciate the description of that, but it's never quite the same, Chris, because they're children, right? And so it's
mhm,
never
mhm.
quite the same, right? Like
They
it's
all sneezing
always
on you
some.
though. So yeah,
They're all sneezing on you, but like just the
yeah.
energy, the like the creativity, like that you may have to use, class for class, let alone year by year. And then also want to lift up, there's some folks who like they live for that. Like that is exactly what they want to do. And we should celebrate that, support them, encourage it when it's needed. And then there are others who actually want to have some additional level of intellectual stimuli. They want to see how else can I have leadership in the building, in the community, in policy. So you have organizations like Teach Plus. Folks are still teaching, but they're also elevating their voices to policymakers about here's how your policies are impacting my instruction, my classroom, my experience, the experience of students, right? So you have organizations like that. You have others within schools who are thinking about, okay, what are career lattices? What are like opportunities for you to lead, to use your experience to that transform, to compound your impact into something positive for the school or district, at large. And so you have grade team leads, content team leads. You have special projects that you're working on. You have coaching responsibilities. But these are things that you have to believe important for your school, and then you match it with people who want to do that. So like all the schools I led had multiple levels of leadership that teachers could be involved in. And I was a beneficiary of being led by teachers, and also later leading other teachers as a classroom teacher myself.
Hmm, hmm,
And so
hmm.
being able to experience Dr. Blackwell as my grade team lead, older black teacher, or Mr. Gibbs, black male teacher again, who were in leadership roles within the school. But now I was also learning from my teacher mentors like Miss Corbett. And, my instructional coach was a former teacher, Yvonne Savior, who, she blessed our kids because she taught me how to teach.
Hmm,
Right. And so
hmm.
right there, those are four, teacher leaders who impacted me directly, as well as so many other teachers in the city.
They didn't all have to have a title or something. like you're going to be this next year, or like a coach. They
Well,
did
they
they did
all
adjust
had it.
some.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
all had like formal roles, but also had so many others who did not have those formal roles. Miss Hawkins, Miss Leggett, Mrs. Lee, Miss Delisandra, right? Like the list goes on and on and on of folks who like mentored me and just like, hey, young man, we're going to teach you how to be successful in the school. And I stayed there for 10 years. And in my last year, I was the assistant principal. That they dragged me out and said, no, we want you to be the assistant principal of our school community, right? So they raised me
Hmm. Wow.
into a teacher and into a leader. And but the school culture and community had that type of vision, right? And I didn't realize till after I left that that wasn't pervasive across the city. It wasn't until later when I got out of this, bubble, this kind of safe, great community, that I started learning, like, oh, everybody's experience isn't like that. Wait, you never had a coach? Wait a minute, you don't have a mentor? Wait a minute, you don't have someone that you're tag teaming with, right? Like I was naive, again, as a career changer somewhat. I hadn't really started a career to change, but I didn't major in
Yeah.
education,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It was a new
but so I
path for
was
you.
naive. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was naive thinking this was just how everybody everywhere operated.
So this is teaching that we have just talked about. Now let's talk a little bit about the next piece, which is, once you have a prepared teacher, do you have a strong curricula? Do you have a
Mm,
strong curricula, and are you able to deliver meaningful assessments? And by meaningful, I mean assessments that produce data and information that's useful for you to become a better partner with your student, like some data that helps you do that. So when we talk about strong curricula and we talk about meaningful assessments. In my mind, I'll give you what I think the problem and the fix is, and then you can tell me what
mhm.
you think the problem and the fix is. When it comes to strong, as a former school board member, the way that we adopt curricula is ridiculous. It's all over the map. And if you were the governor of a state, for instance, and you had like, 100 school districts in your state and they were all picking curricula in very different ways, I could see how your entire state would have uneven learning outcomes, because the vendors that sell you curricula, I couldn't think of a more kind of shady business than the people who come to sell you curricula without knowing much about your district or the type of kids that you're serving, or without much data on how their product works. And meanwhile, you've got like separate school boards with separate superintendents making these adoptions, these curriculum adoptions, in ways that's not scientific. They're doing it in ways that are kind of faith based. In a lot of ways, it feels very, very faith based. Like, oh yeah, I believe this one sounds good. The marketing was good. We can't do
It's
that if we
heaven for
want stuff.
a snake's oil salesperson, right? This is heaven.
And the market is full of them. The market,
Mm.
like the people who have figured out that selling curricula to districts is actually like a good hustle, is like
Billions,
we
billions.
yeah, I was about to say that the dollar amount on that is just crazy. So it's all over the map. That's one problem. Two, it's not science based. It feels very much like vibes. Like, I feel like this, this curricula is good, um, and it's not very longitudinal. Meaning, we had one vendor that told us that they couldn't give us any data on how it had worked because it takes 10 years to understand whether or not the curricula worked that they were selling to us. And in 10 years, the board and the superintendent are going to be gone, right? They're going to have left. So it's a good hustle, because every 10 years you could keep saying, oh yeah, we need to send you another, yeah, several $1 million a year for something. Anyways. And then meaningful assessment, I don't have a problem and a fix there. I would just say the problem is, I believe in the main, we are not receiving enough useful information or data for people to change their instruction, to drive instruction. That's what data is for. Data is to drive instruction to an effective point, like for a desired outcome, right? So the data helps you kind of intervene and helps you to reshuffle yourself or your lessons. So both of those things, I would say, the real problem is that they are not taken care of at a high enough level. Meaning, like when I said the thing about the governors, there's just things that we know nationally. There's just things that we know nationally about curricula and the science of assessments and all that, that governors should be taking the lead on in their states, so that they don't have 150 different districts doing all kinds of crazy stuff like all over the map. And then you don't then you ask yourselves, well, I don't know why Iowa didn't, live up to its. Well, you don't really. Have you done an audit of what you guys are using to teach and how you're measuring it? So what say you? What do you think about this piece, the strong curricula and meaningful assessments?
Yeah, and if folks have not listened to Emily Hanford's, I forget the exact name of
Sold the
the
story.
Sold the
Yeah, sold
Story.
the story. Yeah.
They should really listen to this, because I think it captures a lot of what you're talking about, of as far as like how important curricula is, how many people use it, and how it can actually undermine instruction if it's the wrong set of strategies. And it's so layered, right? So you have some folks who purchase curricula, and then there's no training or development for it. It's just handed out like, hey, teaching this. Sometimes it's switched every year for no reason. We're like, oh, now we're moving to this, right? The shiny penny syndrome, right? And so then, I remember when I first started teaching, someone told me that Texas and California, like a lot of the country uses what Texas and California uses, because that's where the publishers, they base it off of those standards. And if they can sell it to Texas and California, then everyone else, it's like kind of New York. Oh, we got the largest state. Well, if New York, but that means it's good for everywhere, right? Like that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then imagine, so what you described for a state, Iowa, imagine a place like Philadelphia, where schools across you could find a sixth grade classroom in the district in one part of the city, had a different curriculum than a sixth grade classroom in another city. You add the student movement, what do they call that? When, people are moving around, they move a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I was
and
going to say
so, yes.
transients, but that's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
it.
yeah. Like, well,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, it's sort of like you're like transfer multiple times, during the year. You look at some of the data of like how many students started the year and what group of students ended the year, and how much volatility that is. Now, you started with one curriculum, you went to another. It seems to me, and they've just kind of been looking at this the past couple of years, that if you leave from one classroom to another, like you should be generally in the same, not like, oh, totally different curriculum. And I get like there's nuance, and maybe a week ahead or in an intervention, blah blah blah, all those kind of things. But to have totally different things inside of one district, and then Pennsylvania has 500 districts.
Mm,
New Jersey, as tiny as New Jersey is, they have like maybe almost 300 districts, right?
that's
Like it's like,
crazy.
so, well,
Yeah, that's
everyone wants
crazy.
their own sovereignty, right? Like everyone's
Yeah.
talking about local control,
Yeah.
local control. Like at some point there has to be a balance of local control and common sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I
you
mean,
know
local control, when you have so many different districts, like you just said, in New Jersey, a place like that, local control could be a killer in terms of like the statewide student outcomes. Especially if you have a
and
dumb district and you have some
but a
smart districts, not
but a
everybody's
playground
brilliant. So
but a
yeah.
playground for and then imagine if you have one district that's wealthy students, and they're getting their interventions from home and the wealth from their homes.
Mm-hmm.
Their
Mm-hmm.
safety net has smaller holes, is tighter, the net is tighter. And then it's like, look at our results and look at yours, right? Where the equity is, hey, you know what? They have all the students who are English language learners. They have higher lead, higher, asbestos, higher level students in special ed, less teachers overall, per ratio, then higher attrition rate, all of that. And the district is also like, oh, well, look at ours. That district over there, they're doing poorly, right? Like, so factoring in all of that, that's what we're talking about, like the equity, right? Like, wait a minute, it's not the same. And
Mm-hmm.
pound for pound, actually, the teachers in that district are probably better than yours. And often they are. Like, they could go to your district and teach. You couldn't come to their district and teach, right? Because where the interventions are,
When it
the
feels like
tutoring,
in
that
that
kind of
way,
stuff.
it's
hmm
like doctors in emergency rooms, after you've been that type of doctor for years and you go into like family practice or something in the
right, right,
suburbs, you're kind of like, this is all y'all do? Really? like,
What's the big deal? Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
used to do this in one night. Y'all do this in
Mm.
a month.
Hmm.
All right. So we did teaching, learning, strong curricula, and meaningful assessment. I don't think anyone can do those things justice, but I do think that they should be part of the discussion rather than the political discussion we're having. This is
Yeah,
what we
and
should be
then you know
talking
what?
about.
And
So
I love how
go
you
ahead.
talked about the assessment to inform instruction, right? Like that's part of back to the training, the development. That was one of the things that I did not enter the classroom with. That Miss Xavier and Miss Lee and Miss Letha Hawkins, etc., helped me develop. Like and they call it like checking for understanding. How do you know who has it, who needs support? Like how do you do that,
You mean with
right?
students?
With
With students?
students.
Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How do you
Yeah.
do that? How do you determine? And, you can still go. You can still go around the country, and when day one in 1993, that's what I thought. You just asked the question, and whoever raised their hands got it. Whoever didn't get it, right? Like, and that is so
I
wrong.
get paid. I get paid whether y'all learn or not.
I get paid whether you learn or
Learn or
not,
not.
Joker.
That's like we should put that on a T-shirt. That's going to be my
Let's see.
first day in
You only got to
kindergarten
put the
teaching.
first. You only got to put the first part because every
Yeah,
every student, everyone who's been a student in America can finish the second part. That's like could be a call and response thing. Unfortunately,
in
that's
a
sad.
Baptist church. Um, okay, so the last part of what we had said, were like in terms of the package of the things that we should be talking about if we were serious about educating America's students. That's what we're talking about. Like what should our leaders be talking about? What should our systems people be talking about? And then us in the public. Don't train our attention on dumb stuff or stuff like right now, this last year, I've been kind of obsessed with the book bans,
Mm,
removing books from schools, the gendered bathrooms, and all that stuff. I don't know what the end game is on any of those discussions in terms of turning out students who achieve more. I don't know how any of those things have anything to do with, but they're the major conversation. They're the major conversation that we're having as a nation right now. We're talking about gendered bathrooms when we have a pandemic that wiped out learning. We have the data that it wiped out learning for the majority of kids in the United States. We're talking about gendered bathrooms. So the last part, I would say, meaningful educational interventions was the last one.
mm,
But as you were talking, it kind of hit me that there's maybe a nuance to that, which is this. It's also about pathways. It's also about we have so many broken pathways where you can go off track as a student in terms of your math or in terms of your reading. And I'll give you one example. So right now, this came to my attention as I dug in a little bit with California. They're changing their math now to delay the taking of Algebra 2. So you won't take Algebra 2 when you normally would have taken it. Now you'll take data science as a replacement. And this is supposed to help kids of color who aren't achieving in math very well, who are failing kind of like to get Algebra 2 and whatever. Sounds good in theory, but in terms of the pathway of math, like the things that you need to be on track with to get to college and be able to do college level work, requires you not just to get to algebra 2 but past that, and it's not inconsequential to take that out of the rotation, like to replace that. So you get a different class that year that you maybe pass easier, and you delay algebra 2, but meanwhile you're doing that, but the rich kid is breezing through algebra 2 and then getting on to the next next part of the series of math topics or math subjects, and then they go to college and they have went further than you went, right? They're like, you're not starting at college at equal playing field. And then we wonder why so many of our kids bomb out or in their first year of college, or the work just they're the work doesn't, it's not as easy for them as it is for some other kids, right?
yeah.
So that's a pathway. Like right now, I'm at the point where I'm about to say it's a civil right to have access to algebra,
Mm,
because a whole state is about to take that out of the rotation under the guise that it's going to be helpful to our students. But what would be helpful for our students is for everybody to be on the same page of what the series is, what the progress series in math is, so that we're not shooting in the dark. When are you supposed to have algebra 1? When are you supposed to have algebra 2? I don't know why we do what we do with geometry and where we put it, but it's in the series, but it's not in the place I would think to put it, and so on, because eventually you want to get to statistics. I think every American, we should be turning out Americans who can understand statistics if they're going to be voters, right? So, you know,
Well, who wants them to be voters though? Like, I mean, that's
I mean, we have an ignorance outbreak. We have a pandemic of ignorance that is not keeping up with the world, and things like getting to statistics sounds kind of like out of reach. But why? Why does it sound out of reach for the wealthiest country in the world? You would think we would have the smartest kind of kids. Anyways, that's a long-winded setup.
no. Listen, first of all, Chris, you have to remember, as a country, this is an unserious group of people about kids,
That's
learning,
true.
about the vulnerable
Yeah.
period, about vulnerability. This is probably the bastion of unseriousness,
Hmm.
and it's really tragic, on so many levels. I didn't hear about the California thing, and you know, I'm not surprised to hear that, because you hear all this kind of juggling. It's just like, oh, how do we, um, instead of like, okay, there are parts of, like, what's our math sense, and as a country, like, it's like geography and math are two things that, and history are probably three things and literacy, like, just the whole gamut, like America as a
Hmm.
whole is just struggles with, right? We don't like history. We don't understand history. We don't recognize history. We can't name places on a map, right? Like, we can bomb it, but we can't name it. Math, everyone's like, oh, and I love the campaign you had on, like, last year, like, everyone's a mather, like, stop telling
Hmm.
people
Hmm.
they're not good at math, or you're not good at math. And how many teachers in elementary school may skip over or skim over, right? Like, so it goes back to what we started off with, like, what's the prep program? There are parts of algebra that you can teach to elementary school kids, right? Like, that, this
Hmm.
kind of algebra, the unknown, like, that is something, that is a life thing, right? Like, that is something that applies to so many different, facets, but it's also just part of critical thinking and problem solving. So, again, what's the ed prep program? What's the curricula? How are folks trained? How are they giving feedback? How are they giving students feedback? Right? Like, all of these things stack up into a structure, or into just
Mm.
chaos.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so, like,
I like
having
that.
that through line is absolutely important, right? And so, like, is that, we have some places that are pushing algebra down to middle school, and then we have others who are saying, like, oh no, that's not important, right? Like, so again, it's like the constant wild west, like, with no kind of logic and research, and fundamental, and then you say, like, all right, here's how we intervene or accelerate depending on the situation. But it's like all over the place all the time.
You know what? I think, that helps me understand that one of our biggest problems is local control, like you said it before. This idea that we would decentralize education and just have it be whatever anybody wants in whatever
It's
state,
whatever you
and
want,
yeah, whatever
whatever you
governor
said,
comes
whatever
in
you're
this year.
sold.
Yeah, there is a because it's a national security issue in my mind to have so many morons in your country, and every country has this as a problem. Every
Not just
country has
morons in power, right? That's a different
morons
type
in
of
power.
security.
And you know what? The difference in American morons than global morons is that American morons have more confidence. Like
Yeah,
they lead the world
than
in
everybody.
confidence. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah. They're like,
oh
and
yeah.
they're morons. And I'm not saying that to be mean. There's a literal definition for moron, and we have a lot of them. And as a national security risk, like the things that we're talking about with misinformation, the only reason that that's deadly for a country is because you have people believing dumb shit, and then they're recirculating it. And if you are foreign power and you wanted to take a country down, you don't have to go to war with them now. All you have to do is weaponize their morons, which is what's
Yeah.
happening in the United States right now. And I'm sure we're going to figure out that some other country, China, Russia, or some whatever, that's exactly what they're doing right now.
Well, don't
Um,
forget, it's and we often focus on, the foreign power, the foreign enemy, or whatever terminology people use, but it's really the domestic power and the domestic enemy that's the most dangerous.
Well, I mean, I think I'm saying the same thing in
Yeah.
that they're dangerous because if they get the wrong idea about something, they have the power to actually institute that wrong thing. Like they have the power to make it happen. Like, we've said this before. If every white person tomorrow woke up and thought that it was important for black people to wear orange jumpsuits every day, they could pass the law to make that happen. They literally have the power to make that happen. We don't have the power to say, like, say we wanted to paint the White House black and we all woke up tomorrow and said that's what we want to do, right?
Good luck.
Even
Vote on it.
good
Vote
luck.
on
Yeah,
it.
even with the president, we couldn't make that happen. But the flip of what I said is really true. So white ignorance is actually kind of lethal for us. But the point I was driving home with that too is federalizing some education would make some sense to me because we have a federal interest, we have a national interest in states not being all over the map with their outcomes, and then states should be on the hook, like governors should be on the hook, and then superintendents and school boards and districts, but we try and push everything down to the bottom, and what bubbles up is uneven. The last thing I was going to say about this was um, the rich aren't doing this. Like more better off families, they can do everything that you just said. Like they can name countries on a map. They can tell you basic things. They can tell you the different branches of government. They can tell you the history of the branches of government. They can tell you a lot of things because the elite and the semi-elite and the elite adjacent actually still have a very strong focus on their kids actually really learning that all the problems we're talking about is for everybody else, like the having broken pathways to math. The kids that show up to college, math geniuses and ready to go and can do all kinds of blah 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 blah. They're part of the elite mainstream. They're part of that elite adjacent. There's still a whole group of Americans who don't have any of the problems that we're talking about. Their kids are going to learn that's other people's kids stuff. Like when we're talking about this, and the reason they're doing that is because they're preparing their kids to lead the world. They're preparing their kids to be the managers, the poverty managers, the district managers, the state managers, the wealth managers, the Wall Street managers, whatnot. That's what they want for their kids. And you can see in their families, they'll have like 3 or 4 kids, and all 3 or 4 of those kids will have high level degrees and be working in the world somewhere. You look at their LinkedIn, and all of them are doing something. That's not by accident that we believe silently that that's good for them, but publicly, not so much. We're not so intense about this with everybody else because maybe this sounds conspiratorial, but there's a need for janitorial workers. There's a need for public education has always been part of the conspiracy to keep the poor, the middle class, and the elite, right? And each of those classes reproduce themselves through the education system. We have some great public schools that are turning out kids that go to college and do very well. Um, they're enclaves. Not everybody can live where they live. Not
Not
everybody can
everybody
get
has
into the schools
access.
that they get right. But that's by design. That's a system. That is systemic kind of reproduction of the elite. And if you're listening to this and you've never been to one of those schools or seen it with your own eyes, it would blow your mind when you compare it to what is being given to like urban kids, for instance. It would blow your mind. On the same day, you should go to those 2 schools.
Bruh, so my kids' school, they used to go to an Islamic school that was taken over by the county in eminent domain. So took the land, closed down the school, and built a middle school. I've not been there, but everyone who talks about this middle school are like they cannot believe that it's a school because it's so
Mm-hmm.
foreign to
Mm-hmm.
all the other experiences that they've had. Yo, man, I mean, just the stories about like this school. I think Black Rock Middle School in Lower Marion. It's insane. I mean, and I don't mean insane in a bad way. Like, it just mean like that school looks like that, and then you come across the county line, and you see elementary school, middle school, in other places, and you're like, yo, is this the same planet? Let alone the same state, let alone within a couple miles of each other. Is this the same planet? And are we talking about, are these the same human beings, right? Like human beings in one, human beings in another? Or is one a school and one is just a training ground? What's the difference? And your earlier point as far as like who's in power, reminds me, Stokely Carmichael used to say, if a white man wants to lynch me, that's his problem. If he has the power to lynch me, then that's my problem. Because racism is grounded in power, not just these individual uh, attitudes and dispositions, right? Like it's like, where does the power lay, and how is power protected? How does it coalesce to protect itself? It's like police department. Are they there to protect and serve, or are they there to police? It often depends on who we're talking about, and the relationships that people have with them varies because of their orientation towards that particular community. Same thing with school. All these institutions, right, are kind of mirror each other in how they operate, how they interact with the public, and what side of the river or road that they're in determines what type of services you're going to receive.
I mean, that gets us to the end and to where we always end up on this show. It's a conspiracy, like, which is true. I mean, and if you
Bro,
think,
that quote you just
so
said, remember that
yeah,
was said in Pennsylvania's state court,
yeah, yeah.
that we need pizza crust makers, right? Like, why do they need this? Why should we invest in, back to math? Why should we invest in algebra? We need this. The Commonwealth needs people to make pizza crust, right? And shout out to the folks who serve, and provide food for the 300 plus million people in this country, right? Like, shout out to them. This is no disrespect to them. But for someone in power to say, we're going to decide who does that for the Commonwealth, for the state, and we're going to determine that based on how we treat them and what we invest in, that's where the issue is. Back to Stokely, right? Like, it's the
Hmm.
power that they wield is what is my problem.
So I want to read this quote. I think I read it on one of our previous shows because it goes right along this. What you said was just said in court. The earliest kind of in 1916, the book called "The Country School of Tomorrow," which was produced by Rockefeller and his advisor Frederick Taylor Gates. They were one of the most instrumental groups in history of establishing high schools. They thought high schools was the way to go because most Americans didn't have access to high school. So instead of college, high school was the college of that day, and they wanted to build high schools all across the country in the countrysides and get more Americans into it. So they put a small fortune into it, like what we think about Gates and Walton and others today. Well, Rockefeller's to have that much money in 1916 was like, it was an astounding amount of money they could put into it. Here's the quote: "We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We have not to raise up from among them authors, editors, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have ample supply." And basically, the next part of the quote goes on to say, "Our goal is to make them educated enough to stay right where they are, um, um, to train these people as we find them to a perfectly ideal life just where they are." Right? Like, that is the purpose of the American high school that was set out, years ago. Anyways, well, this has been a
Well,
riveting
and
show. So it's like,
before
go
and
ahead.
before
Yeah,
we
yeah.
before we end, just to parallel, just because I think sometimes people hear it and they're like, "Oh, conspiracy," or that was just a one off, or that was just a thing. So I mentioned the state. You mentioned, what year was that? You said
1916.
1916. So let's even go back even further, right? So I said something. This was what, 2 years ago in Pennsylvania, 1916, and then the devil incarnate Thomas Jefferson also talked about public schools. And
Right,
he talked
right.
about using it as a way to rake and he's talking about like white people, mind you. Mind you, he's talking about white people, let alone what he thought about. We already know what he thought about black people, Native American. He's talking about white people. He said we can use the public education system funded by the public to rake the geniuses from the rubbish, and use
Hmm.
the school to determine who they should invest in, who the public should invest in, and they should cast aside. Right, and that's his term. Rake the geniuses from the rubbish. Rubbish. He's talking about people's children, but who are not wealthy, who probably did not own land, who did not have the tutors, did not have the enslaved to do all these things. Right, like, so this is his own. Listen, bro.
When
It's
you say that, it's funny. Those are the type of things that, in your time when you write them, you're like, this will never be a problem ever in the future. This will never be like something that is an issue.
No, he's
Wow,
like
I don't think I've heard that before.
put 100 in the classroom, and every year, take the best geniuses, rake them from the rubbish annually, and be instructed at the public expense. Right, so that's still, so when you look at Black Rock Middle School, that's in Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and then you look at other middle schools that are also in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which Pennsylvania should be responsible for the fair education of all its citizenry. We can see that they're like, no, this is really an apartheid state in just in a veneer of local control. That's exactly what this is. They're fulfilling Thomas Jefferson, just you know, illegal and hate-filled legacy. This is America.
What's so funny about that is local control is great depending on your local. The local you're controlling, right? Like if the
Yeah.
local you're controlling is full of lead in the water and pollution and broken glass everywhere.
Broken glass
Yes,
everywhere.
everywhere.
Listen, that should be on repeat. That's gonna be my new theme when I go to a protest. Broken glass everywhere. They just
Yeah.
don't care.
Yeah, it's like a jungle sometimes. All right. Well, listen, brother, I appreciate this conversation. I think the topic today really is one that I'm carrying. That's the message that I'm carrying now is if we are serious, let's get back to a conversation that is based upon the real things that matter for us. Let's not be distracted with conversations that have nothing to do with student achievement, because at the end of the day, our only goal is to make sure that our students are way more prepared than they are right now. Like that's our only goal right now is to push them forward because what's going on right now with them in terms of their outcomes is it's a problem that we have to solve. So we're not going to solve that by arguing about who gets to go to what bathroom and who gets to play what sport and all that type of stuff. So I just have no interest. I will fight back on those issues. I'll just put it that way. When they come up, I will tell people how stupid they are. But at the end of the day, the most important message for all of us is get serious about the nuts and bolts of education. That's where that's where all the movement is. What's your final word, sir?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think making teaching and learning fundamental, a part of the conversation that is informed by research, that drives policy, that drives the support, that drives the systems, the policies, procedures, rules, regular, all of those things should be grounded on, like, our students learn, how are the children,
How are the children?
how are the children, and how are
Yeah,
those who are serving the children. That's what the conversation, that's central to any serious people. But we
I
live in an
love it.
unserious country.
We do, and we have a moron problem, but we're going to solve it, especially with our own people, for our own kids
Mhm.
in our lifetime. We're going to solve this problem.
Yes,
You've
sir.
been listening to another episode of Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you are freer now than when Sharif and I started this conversation. We will see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening and for watching.